And we're live. Hello, good morning, everyone. How you doing? I hope you're doing well. Happy belated St. Patty's Day. I'm wearing my mint green shirt. Karen's got some green on. Steven has told me that St. Patty's Day is not apparently a thing, really, that where he is, even though he's closer to where it originates, from what I understand. So that's an interesting thing. No green for Steven, but it's also new Apple product day, which is very exciting, and we have tons to go over. We're talking iPad Air 5, we're talking Mac Studio and Studio Display, some green iPhones, iPhone SE. There's a lot of things to go over today because this is the iMore show, and today is Friday, March 18th. I am one of your hosts, Luke Filipowicz. I am a writer at iMore, and joined, as always, by iMore contributor Karen Freeman. How you doing, Karen?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. And our news editor at iMore, Stephen Warwick. Thanks for joining us, Stephen.
Not at all. Good afternoon.
So it's new product day. It's one of the more exciting days that we get throughout the year for us Apple users, us Apple fans. And I had a chance to review the iPad Air 5, and we asked you on social media if you had any questions, and I have a few of them that I'll kind of go over. But iPad Air 5, been very, very impressed with it. It's the new version of the iPad Air. The iPad Air 4 we already loved. Everyone at iMore kind of said that, like, for most people, it was kind of like the iPad to buy. I think the iPad Air definitely takes over that mantle fairly easily. It's it has the M1 chip, which is like the big. So the three main big upgrades the iPad Air has over the iPad 4 are it has 5G connectivity, although it is important to note that it is sub-6 5G and not millimeter wave 5G. If you don't know what either of those things mean, you probably don't care about 5G, which is totally fine because it's not that big of a deal right now for a lot of people. But essentially, sub-6 5G is the lower / less fast, the less capable 5G. You know, the 5G speeds that you hear about that are reaching like 1 gig, things like that. That's going to come from the millimeter wave 5G, which is a bit better. The other big improvements are obviously the 12 megapixel front-facing ultra-wide camera that has center stage, which if you haven't used an iPad yet that has center stage, which it's on all the iPads now. The iPad Air was the last one to get it, but it's on all the iPads now. It's really awesome for video calls. It makes it so you don't have to like adjust your iPad as much if you're like moving around positions, because the camera will do it for you. It'll pan with you. You can like be chopping carrots or something and it'll like put you in frame, and then you can come sit down and it'll put you in frame, and it's really awesome. It's really great. And then of course the big one is the M1 chip that is powering and is the brain behind this entire machine. And I mean, it's hard to even put it into words really, because in a lot of ways an M1 chip doesn't even really need to be in an iPad, to be honest. We said that when the iPad Pro came out too. Like, iPad OS is only so good, and I like iPad OS a lot for what it is, but like, this is a Mac level processor in a tablet. It is a bit like putting a Ferrari engine in a Toyota Prius,
or a food blender.
Yeah, or something like that. But yeah, those I've been very, very impressed with it. And as somebody who's coming from like the base iPad, it's obviously it's quite a huge upgrade from even just last year's base iPad. If you are looking to kind of expand your iPad abilities, this is definitely going to let you do that, especially if you're coming from, the just the iPad from last year. Do either of you have any questions, or what have your opinions been of the Air, just based on my review, the other reviews we've seen out there? What do you two think?
Oh, my first. I don't want to subvert, like maybe if someone else has asked this in the comments in the run up to the show, but my big question, like you said, there are only really the three things that have changed. I guess my first one, you mentioned center stage. That's quite a big upgrade to the camera. What about the quality? I don't know how much you used your previous iPad for calls and that such, but did you like, how noticeable is the camera jump in the new iPad Air in terms of the front facing camera? Because some people will buy the iPad Air and use it as a video conferencing or just a device to connect with family and friends. So I'd be interested to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a pretty stark difference if you put them side by side and you use them both. You use the iPad Air 4 camera and the iPad Air 5 camera. You are going to notice a stark difference. It is a much better camera, and it's actually what's really cool is I like that Apple has like put that on pretty much all their iPads. Like even the base iPad that came out last year, it got that same 12 megapixel front facing ultra wide camera with center stage ability, and it really makes the iPad, all the iPads now pretty much are like, they're great machines for having video calls, and you don't need to worry about not being able to be seen or being blurry or being cut off in any way, and it's really, really great. So you'll definitely notice an improvement. It's not like it's a minor update in terms of the camera. It's quite noticeable.
That's really cool, because I guess the M1 chip also helps with a lot of the onboard. You're not only benefiting from the increased megapixels and the camera quality, but also the M1 chip will help with Apple's always had great on-device like image processing and stuff. So I'm guessing the M1 chip also has an impact there, which that would be my next question. You were saying about the M1 chip and how the processor speed is like too much. Is it a bit silly to put in the iPad? But that is one benefit. Did you notice like a day-to-day impacts on how you're using your iPad, or just the responsiveness or loading times, anything like that, when you've now got the M1 chip as opposed to the previous one?
Yeah, I would say I think the only place you're really going to notice like any intense difference between the M1 and the A14, or if you're going like from the A13 of just the base iPad, where you're really going to notice it is in GPU intensive tasks. Because that's where the M1 really brings a lot of the juice compared to the older chips. So if you're doing things like something I like to do on my iPad, which is kind of really hard to do on my base iPad because it just doesn't go as smoothly, I do a lot of high res photo editing. I take a lot of pictures in RAW on my dedicated digital camera, and I like to do a lot of the color edits, contrasting edits, a lot of the lighting effects that I try to achieve. That stuff is GPU intensive. And the iPad Air 5 like blazed through like I got through an insane amount of photo editing from like my jog that I went on a week ago, and I take pictures and stuff, and I take pictures of birds and whatever. And usually I'll end up with like 40 or 50 photos that I want to edit, and like to get through them on my iPad, it's kind of not great, but to get through them on my iPad Air, it was amazing. It was easy using the Apple Pencil. If you happen to pick that one up too, was like awesome for like little tweaks here and there. You'll really notice it with GPU intensive tasks. I feel like for CPU intensive tasks, unless you're really getting into the weeds on some very intense workflows, I don't think you'll actually notice it too much. It's not like the A14 chip in the last iPad Air was bad. It's not like it wasn't fast. It's not like if you have that right now that it's probably not doing its job. I don't think you'll know. I think you'll really notice it when it comes to the GPU performance.
So I have two comments. One is that I suspect that Apple hasn't fully told us yet why they put M1 chips in the iPad Air and iPad Pro. And perhaps that will be answered, as Craig in the comments said, at WWDC. Perhaps Apple will announce some reason why they've done that, something that will take full advantage of that. My other comment is about the center stage, because I have it on my iPad Mini 6. It does work really, really well. It's really weird because the camera is on... When you're using your iPad in landscape, the camera's on the side, so you're at a weird angle already. So and when you shift around, it just gets weirder and weirder. I was on a FaceTime call with my family, and my kids were freaking out. They're like, "Mom, what's going on with your camera? You look weird." Just a comment about that.
Is the Air landscape camera oriented, or is it still portrait? I honestly can't remember.
It's right here.
Yeah.
So if you have your iPad, are you talking about the Air?
Oh yeah, with the new one. Sorry. Yeah.
No, the
Air
still
is
in the same spot.
Yeah, the Air is the same thing. So when you're
Yeah, so it would be
landscape,
better
it
to
is on
have
the
a
side.
stand
Yeah.
if you're going to be doing FaceTime calls. It would be, or video conferencing at all, Zoom, whatever. It
Mhm.
would be better to have a stand that holds your iPad in portrait mode, because in
Yeah.
landscape mode, that center stage is just weird.
Luke, I had a question. It's obviously not exclusive to this one because the feature was introduced with the previous iPad. Touch ID on the top button.
Mhm.
How have you found that? Because it's obviously a much small Touch ID is great if you like it on the iPhone SE or previous models, but the top button is a much smaller surface area. I've definitely seen Oliver at iMore complaining about how bad it is, and I just wondered if you had a similar experience, if you thought it worked quite well. What was your your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this was my first time using like the Touch ID and kind of like the new sort of sensor setup. And I wouldn't say it's bad. I think on occasion, if you don't get your finger kind of like right on place, it is a
Hmm.
little less, it'll pick up your fingerprint a little less just because the surface area isn't quite as big or as like, it might even honestly just be the shape, like a round circle's a little more, can cover a bit more of your thumbprint than you kind of like a thin sort of oblong rectangle. I don't think it's bad. I think it's definitely useful. And I mean, it works very fast and well. And like, it's the Touch ID, and love. The one thing that I didn't even really notice, but luckily Apple thought about it when you set up the iPad, is like, obviously if it's in orientation mode and depending on if it's in landscape orientation or portrait orientation, the button's in different places. But since you
Hmm.
can turn an iPad, 360 and the screen will just follow you, right? You might which finger is closer to the button might be
It's not
different
always yeah.
depending on what you're holding. So it's actually the best thing to do to set up at least 2 prints, if not even more. I think I ended up setting up like 4 of my fingerprints just because depending on which way I hold it, it's a little easier to grab certain things. Or
I remember
so
5
I
being
always
the
do these
max on the
4.
old,
yeah,
on the iPhones, and you would just put as many as possible, like,
yeah,
or at a toe
Yeah,
maybe or something, just in
yeah.
case.
So I to answer your question, Stephen, I wouldn't say it's bad. I would say like occasionally if you're not being if you're not being a little more mindful, you might kind of hit the edge of the sensor and it might not quite work. But I don't think it's bad by any means. I think it's a bit different. It takes a little bit to get used to, just to make sure that oh, it's on the side, it's not where it is. Because I kept thinking about how, oh, I have Touch ID and I would like go to press the screen, kind of where the home button would be, and I'd be like, oh, it's not a home button. I gotta
Yeah.
go.
New
And
muscle memory.
And
yeah, right. And I'm
it's
so
like
used to
the
swiping on my iPhone. You thought I would swipe a bunch, but no, I kept being like, oh, Touch ID. Phone. Oh, no.
it's like the iPhone as well, where you can click the button for power or to lock, but I guess you just hold your finger without clicking to activate Touch ID. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, you can change it in the settings too.
Oh, okay, cool. I
Um,
think that would be my big clumsy sausage fingers. I would be, going for Touch ID and just locking my iPad every time or turning it off or something. So
yeah.
that's cool. Yeah, because I
But yeah, you
suppose.
are like by default, you just sort of rest your finger on it and then it'll open. But I believe, I don't quote me because I haven't actually changed it myself because I found it fine. But I'm pretty sure, much like Touch ID on some of the other devices too, is like you can do it so that you can just press it and then it should recognize your finger and open your screen at the same time. But I might not 100%. That might just be an iPhone thing. But in any case, I find Touch ID to be very, if you like Touch ID or you're used to it, I don't think it's a big issue. Just like you have to kind of make sure that you are hitting that button, and definitely put, like Karen said, thumbs and index fingers, and same with Annie in the comments. Thumbs and index fingers really help to make sure you always have the closest finger to the Touch ID button, depending on which way you're holding it.
Sure. Did you have any of the audience questions to answer still?
Yeah, so got a few kind of comments more than questions, and people kind of wondering. A lot of people saying that, if you can pick up a used 2018 iPad Pro, that might be actually a better use of your money than the iPad Air 5. And I would say that comes down to how you intend on using your device and what you actually care about at the end of the day. And it depends what the price might be, right? If you're talking used, if you're talking from secondhand off, your aunt or uncle, and they might just be like, throwing you a cheap iPad Pro, then sure, that might be great. But if you're looking through like official resellers and stuff, you might not actually find that the price have gone down that much, even though it is an older device. I would say it's the same thing it's the same reasons if you're looking to buy a new iPad, why you might go with an iPad Pro instead of the iPad Air is do you want those very specific things that the iPad Pro gives you? So like a lot of people love ProMotion and they love the 120 hertz refresh rate. And I understand that. And it's not that I don't like it. It's not that I don't appreciate it when I have it on a device, but like, I don't really know personally, I don't notice much of a difference in my everyday work. Like you'll notice a difference in gaming and you'll notice it, with things that you can use refresh rate. But like the whole point of ProMotion is that it's variable. So you're not always using 120 hertz. You're only using 120 hertz at maximum if it needs it. It kind of goes up and down a bunch. So you're not really seeing the screen. It's not like you're seeing the screen at 120 hertz the entire time. So I feel like it's actually not that big of a deal. A lot of people would disagree. A lot of people would say, I've gotten used to ProMotion and I can't go back to non-ProMotion displays. And that's a valid thing. I know it's for me, like I have a hard time now with like non 4K displays after using 4K displays for a long time, going down to something that's just like 1080p, especially if it's big enough. Like I'm just like, I can't, what am I looking at? Yeah, I would say obviously that's a pro for the iPad Pro. If you really want that, if you do a lot of iPad photography maybe or videography, you'll want the better cameras. Not that the camera on the iPad Air is bad by any means, but it is only the single camera. It doesn't have a LiDAR sensor and things like that. So if you want that camera array, if you have a big use for it, then that totally makes sense that you might want to jump up to the Pro or grab an old Pro. And the other thing too is the Thunderbolt can be a big sticking point for some people. The iPad Air 5 literally only has a USB-C port. It's not Thunderbolt capable. So if you have workflows that really need that like giant data transfer speed that Thunderbolt can give you, then you're not going to be able to get that with the iPad Air for sure.
Would limit you for certain types of displays as well, would it not? Am I right in thinking?
I mean, the iPad Air can technically run up to one 6K display. Like it can run a Pro Display XDR if you really want it to. I'm not sure why you would want it to, but if you do want it to, if that's something that's in your workflow, the iPad Air 5 can do that. But yeah, with Thunderbolt, you can get up to more, and you can kind of like daisy chain because there's more data and more bandwidth available. So yeah, if you're working at iPads with like multiple setups, that's something you're also going to want, or multiple screen setup, you're also going to want, the iPad Pro for that. But for the majority of people, I can't see the iPad Air 5 not working for you, especially if you're just used to like normal tasks. And there was somebody who had asked me, they have the iPad Air 4 and do they think it's necessary to kind of upgrade to the iPad Air 5? And I would say probably not, unless you find that your iPad Air 4 for some reason is struggling with maybe certain tasks. If you find that it's really chugging through stuff, but I doubt that would be the case if you're using it for more basic, like as a media player, as a video, because it's a great screen for watching movies or Netflix or what have you. If you're using it as like, to take notes or to draw, like none of that's really probably going to change based on the M1 performance. The only thing I can think of is if you do a lot of, like I said, GPU intensive tasks, and you do find that the A14 is kind of dipping in performance, then it may be worth an upgrade. But chances are, if you have an iPad Air 4, and as long as you're not experiencing any problems, I would say you probably don't need to upgrade to this generation. Especially once again, if 5G is not something you care about. If you love using Wi-Fi and cellular, and you'd happen to have a 5G network, and you think that it would be great to be able to take advantage of the sub-6 5G capabilities, then by all means, maybe it'll be worth it for you. But I can't see it for a lot of people who have the iPad Air 4 that it would be necessary to upgrade to the iPad Air 5. And Karen you mentioned earlier, as well as Craig in the comments, about like, we've seen these M1 chips in iPads, and iPad OS is still sort of what it is. It's not quite, up there yet, but they have progressively. iPad OS is still kind of new. If you think about it, they only really broke it off from, iOS, like what, 2 years ago now, I think, or I think it was I think it was iOS / iPad OS 13, if I remember correctly, where they broke it off, I think. So it's only been a couple of years that they've really had this, and they've really been like tailoring the iPad experience, the operating system to the iPad experience itself. So I'm hopeful for the future. I'm definitely hopeful that in the future more stuff is going to be added, and the fact that they can put these, Mac level, very capable chips into these devices, and they work. They don't cause like giant heat problems. There aren't, there aren't so many things that can go wrong. Now I think that they can go back and they can look at it and be like, all right, how can we push this? How can we make it so that, it uses all this like wonderful power that it has inside? So I'm hopeful for the future of iPad OS for sure. And I think, the other great thing about chips too is like, as they age, they do kind of lessen in performance. But if you happen to be upgrading or getting the iPad Air 5, like that M1 is going to last you for years before you'll notice it, before you'll notice any drop in performance at all, for sure.
Luke, what color did you get?
I got the purple.
And does it pop? Because purple's a new color, isn't it? So that's cool that you got hands on with that.
It's the same as the Mini.
Yeah, it's the same as the
purple. Isn't the purple the same?
Sure.
Yeah.
I should have said new color for the Air.
Yeah. So it's like grayishy kind of.
Yeah. And you like it? Yeah. You think is it a, because that is one of, again, you said about the Pro versus the Air. One of the differences, which are important to some people, is the color options and the choices. So yeah. Do you think those extra, like the primary colors that kind of more pop, like they look good, they kind of they finish well? Because I think we've talked about before how sometimes the press images don't always do the colors finishes themselves justice.
Yeah, and I think like I got the purple instead of the blue, because the blue is kind of like a newer blue to the iPad Air. It's not the same sky blue from last time, and that looks really interesting and kind of a little more deep. But like the pink and the purple are kind of a little more like muted, but they're really nice. They're like kind of like a pastel-y sort of like kind of like a more of a hint of purple almost. But I really like it.
At first glance, it looks silver. You wouldn't necessarily, it doesn't scream purple. It whispers purple.
But I actually like, one thing I love about, and this is me just kind of like nerding out and being a little, a little extra, I guess. But like when you match the accessories, the accessories to the color of the iPad, it just like when it's sitting there and you're just like looking at it and you're just like, oh, doesn't that look like just a beautiful little package?
So nice.
Yeah. And it's the same with like, I have the blue iPhone, and you get a blue iPhone case with it, and it's fantastic. So that's kind of the iPad Air 5. If you have any more questions throughout the show, if you have anything specific, throw them in the comments. We'll try to get to them. But we do have other things we want to talk about. But Karen, you look like you were about to say something.
Yeah, there was one more question off of social media.
Okay, sure. Yeah, hit me with it.
Is the bezel still as large as the last one, or is it smaller like the M1 iPad Pro?
Right. It is still the same as the iPad Air 4, which is, if you didn't know, is like very slightly bigger than the iPad Pro versions. But that really just, I believe, is just because the screen is also just that much bigger, right? It is an 11-inch screen rather, where the iPad Air is a 10.9-inch screen. I know that sounds silly to say, but it does make it that the bezel around is like just the taddest bit bigger. It still looks great. And if you're used to like, an iPad that has like the basic kind of chin and forehead and bezel kind of thing, it'll look marvelous to you. Trust me. If that's what you're upgrading from, it'll look really clean.
It's the same with the iPad Mini, isn't it? They're ever so slightly large. I think that's maybe one of the only reasons I would go Pro, is that just at first glance, I've looked at them and thought, oh, it's just like a bit too big. But I don't know. I probably have to see it in person. But yeah, no design change, I guess. From the Air 4. Yeah.
So that's also if you have a case or something like that from the iPad Air 5 or for the iPad Air 4, it should fit your iPad Air 5. I say should just because I like to hedge my bets, but like I don't think there's a reason why it wouldn't.
The dimensions are identical.
Yeah, and the the
Nothing's
front facing
moved and the buttons and stuff. Yeah.
and the front facing camera doesn't really take up any extra space or anything that's noticeable in the design or anything. So it's not like you have to worry about that, because I know that that's one thing with the phones, right? It's like, what size is the camera array? Because that little bit here and there can make sure means you need a new phone case, but you don't have to worry about that with the iPad Air 5. So as I said, yeah, if you have any more questions, but feel free to, you can also, if after the show, or if you're listening to this in your podcatcher of choice, give us a shout on Twitter at iMore and let us know. We'll be happy to answer anything we can, but we're going to move on because there's been other things that have come out, and the Mac Studio came out today and has been having some interesting responses, specifically around the studio display.
Did it come out today? I thought it came out last week. Did I make that up?
I'm fairly certain. I'm pretty sure everything launched today. Like everything was the 18th. I'm pretty sure.
You
I
could
might have
order
been
it
pre-ordered.
last week.
Yeah, that's
yeah, you
why.
could order.
Yeah.
You could order it last week, but today is like official
And
launch day.
reviewers got it earlier this week.
Yeah. That's fine. But available to collect it in stores today. You're quite right.
Yeah. So from what we can tell, it looks like the Mac Studio itself, the computer, seems to be very powerful, very capable. There are some interesting choices, like, for example, you can't open it up at all, which might make cleaning that big fan that they made a big deal about how that's important a little hard. I thought that was a bit of a weird choice. I mean, it's not odd for Apple to make their hardware hard to get into, because that's unfortunately a bit of an Apple staple, but something like this, where like the performance will go down if that fan gets too dusty and gets too, filled with like, grime and stuff. Like I don't understand why they wouldn't let you open
skin.
it. I would never, ever in a million years open up a computer to clean it. If it needed to be cleaned, I would take it to the Apple store, whether it was openable or not.
Yep. Apple, as I've seen, not anywhere official, but definitely murmurings that Apple is offering the same sort of cleaning services under warranty that it has done with previous Macs, that you could take in and say, hey, my fan is full of dust, would you please clean this? So yeah, it's definitely, because as you said, the reason that Mac Studio is so much bigger is because it's got a huge heat, especially the Ultra version. It's like 2 pounds heavier just for the cooling system. And that is obviously very important because of how much power is flowing through the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. But I like you, the Studio and the Studio Display reaction, it all dropped kind of at the same time. And everybody seems to be really, really just chuffed to bits with. Is that a word in America? Chuffed?
No, but we'd heard it.
we can. It makes it can get across.
Good.
It can get across.
Chuffed to bits means super excited, y'all.
Yeah.
So
everybody seems super excited with the new Mac Studio. In terms of performance, in terms of form factor, the connectivity. It's got ports on the front, which seems, again, really quite innocuous and silly, but for Apple, that was quite a big deal. And then, the Studio Display alongside it has been not universally panned, but there's been a lot of negative comments. And
I think what people are saying is it's expensive for what it is. Like, it's not a top of the line display. It's kind of a consumer level display, but it's priced sort of in between consumer and professional.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what do you think about the Mac Studio reaction overall? I don't want to. We'll go Mac Studio back to the display, back to Studio. So yeah, I was going to say, what do you guys think about also, I just confused the two of. I use both the names interchangeably as well. Yeah. So yeah, what do you guys think about the Mac Studio? I don't know if you watched any reviews or written reviews or anything like that. What do you guys think?
I've just kind of skimmed them, but they seem pretty positive for the Mac Studio.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
I think my big thing is I've been really focused on the Studio Display and its sort of middling reviews. Kind of what Karen said. I think a lot of people are talking about where that price point falls for what it offers. But I also feel like there is also this dichotomy going around the Studio Display where like a lot of people are like, well, it's not 100, it's not 120 hertz. It's not a ProMotion. So like, how can they call this, like, how is this good? It doesn't do HDR, which I do think is a bit of a misstep.
Yeah.
For sure. But once again, if you look at the market for what 5K displays offer, find me another 5K display that is as clear and has as good of a PPI as the studio display does and offers 120 hertz.
Yeah, as Craig notes, I think the only one that comes close is the 5K LG, the Ultrafine, which Apple used to sell, I'm pretty sure, through the store.
Yeah.
I think it was discontinued, maybe making a comeback. But yeah, it's a very, very small market. And I think some of the criticism is the HDR one, I think, is one that is like a noticeable omission, especially for a $1,500, $1,400 display. I know it's £1,500. I can't remember what the price in US is off the top of my head. But some of the comments and stuff I've seen, I saw one comparison where it's like, look how much worse the dimming is compared to the Pro Display XDR. And it's like, well, yeah, it's probably about $3,000 worse because it costs $3,000 less. The 120 hertz one is an interesting one. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, and I think I'm working on a bit of an explainer piece for this. But basically, it's physically impossible to do 5K 120 hertz. The display itself doesn't have. It's Thunderbolt 3, so that's only good for 4K 120 hertz or 5K 60 hertz. So there's not physically enough data throughput going into the monitor. And I don't know if there are, off the top of my head, any Apple devices that can put out in that level of so it's a bit of a mute point, really. And I've seen a lot of people say as a criticism, oh, it doesn't have 120 hertz, but positioned not as because this is a technological, like a limiting technological factor that Apple is working with, but almost as we have 120 hertz iPhone, 120 hertz iPad, 120 hertz Mac. Why is the studio display not 120 hertz Mac? And it just doesn't. It's like I said, when you have an external display, you're limited by the port that receives the data on the display. You're limited by the port that's putting out the data from whatever external device you're using, and the cable that goes between them. And so that is an actual technical limitation. And so yeah, like you said, the market is really very small for clear 5K displays with great resolution. And the thing, I think it was Justine in her video, she noted the price and was like, yes, it's, for instance, more expensive than that 5K LG, the Ultrafine. But when you buy Apple, you're not buying budget or even middle of the road, right? You're buying, top end premium for all of the other aspects that go into buying an Apple product, not just the performance of the screen itself. You're talking build quality and aftercare and that sort of thing, even the packaging, stuff like that. So yeah, it's been a really interesting reaction.
Yeah. And one of the reactions that I saw was sort of complaining about the nickel and diming that goes on with buying the studio display. Like, for example, like there's the standard glass, or the nano texture glass is an extra $300 if that's something you're interested in.
The
and
adjustable stand,
the adjustable stand, because if you want the adjustable stand, the height, the tilt adjustable stand comes with, but the height adjustable stand is an extra $400, and you can't. You can't change it after the fact. You have to make that decision when you buy it. Or the Visa mount adapter, which is the same price as the tilt adjustable stand. But again, you have to make that that decision at the beginning, which is kind of weird. And Christopher in the comments asked if the height adjustable stand was worth the extra $400. And that's going to depend 100% on you and your use case and your comfort. Like I would, that's something I would go to the store and look at the standard height and see if that's a perfect height for you. Because if it's not the perfect height for you, then you're going to want to choose one of the other
just
options.
saying, you can buy a height adjustable desk for $400 and put it on
That's
that.
true. That's true, but that completely changes the ergonomics when you're talking
Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely
You can also buy a riser, and you can just stick your display on top of the riser. I mean, there are other options, but I'm just saying, like, if you want that adjustable height, that incrementally adjustable height, you have to make that decision before you purchase it.
One very interesting aspect about the new display is the webcam, which, unlike the display, has been universally panned, but I'm conscious that before we do that, we should let Karen tell us about today's sponsor.
Yes.
Yes. Have you ever hit a technical snafu shopping online? Has filling out a payment field given you a headache? Has a mobile banking app even been down when you wanted to use it? Capital One believes everyone deserves better banking. This means easier access to their money and more security. That's why Capital One is investing in machine learning. Machine learning allows Capital One to do things like fight fraud with random forests. Models quickly detect suspicious activity and make it faster to alert federal investigators. Identify how mobile app outages happen with causal models. Keeping our mobile app up and running doesn't happen by accident. Anomaly detection and incident response help determine why app outages happen so engineers can quickly remedy them. Speed up online shopping with machine learning at the edge. Make shopping with virtual card numbers smoother and more secure. This technology is based on logistic regression models and running inference in the browser. It identifies payment fields, which helps make using virtual card numbers easier and faster. The potential of machine learning is so big. See how Capital One is using machine learning to create the future of banking. Search machine learning at Capital One. Capital One, what's in your wallet?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Capital One. Stephen, I'm going to get to your point in just 1 second about the webcam, but I just wanted to say to piggyback off what Karen was saying. So the stand that comes with the studio display is very similar to exactly what an iMac, like the 24-inch iMac display would be. And I'll say this, and it's a little frustrating, and I mentioned it in my iMac review as well, but like it is that odd height that a lot of iMacs have been, where like it is a little lower than you want it to be like the optimal, usually, like, because like when if you're thinking of ergonomics, you should be like looking ahead, and it should like hit you kind of like right in the right sort of like middle part of the screen, and you shouldn't have to do this or this to kind of like to sort of like your head should be in a neutral position. And the iMac is like frustratingly just like a bit below. So one thing I have done is and Christopher, you said that you love the riser idea. There's a lot of interesting like little iMac stands out there that would definitely work for the studio display as well. In fact, that's what I'm using on my iMac right now. It's actually it's from Sateki. It's a USB-C hub, so it actually has some functionality to it, but it also is just like a little, like 2 to 3 inch, probably not even 3 inches, probably like 2-inch stand that it sits on, and that just puts it up to those extra couple inches, and like then it's like perfect right in my good vision space. So like it's I would say that's definitely an option if you don't want to spend $400 on a stand, but definitely go look at it and see if you can move it around and see what it looks like in person, because that's going to be the best way to really decide. Yes, Stephen was mentioning that the webcam was having some interesting issues.
Yeah, this was, I think, the only, not unanimous, but everywhere you turned, The Verge, they mentioned it, Joanna Stern at the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, I think our friends at Tech Radar, they did a review and they didn't notice too many problems, but they said that they were maybe testing in a bit more kind of ambient light than maybe some other people were, but lots of people were very, very surprised by how bad the built-in webcam is in the new studio display, considering it's the same hardware as the iPad Air that Luke was lauding at the start of the show, and considering it has the A13 chip inside of it, which will hopefully be doing that on-device processing we talked about. Some of the side-by-side shots I saw, all of them, it was worse than the iPhone 13, worse than the current iMac, the 24-inch, Luke, that you have, worse even than Joanna Stern said it reminded her of her old BlackBerry camera, which is pretty brutal.
Wow.
But,
yeah, that was
harsh.
that was a below the belt shot, but I appreciated it. It was fun.
Yeah, and there has been a ton of really poor feedback about the webcam. The only good thing about this is there's been so much bad feedback and lots of people going back to Apple and saying, what the heck is going on here? So Apple has confirmed to multiple reviewers that the webcam is not performing as expected. So this is not the finished article. Obviously, it's kind of embarrassing, that all of these were sent out to various reviewers and influencers. And I've also seen that the store's open today with the studio display, and the problems are happening in the store as well. But that this seems to be a late software bug that was added or has appeared in the studio display. Because if you didn't know, this came out today or overnight from John Gruber over at Daring Fireball. The studio display actually runs iOS 15.4, so it is in theory it could be a massive tablet or iPhone, but iOS 15.4 runs on that chip and handles the camera and that sort of thing. So there is the potential for a software upgrade to fix this. But yeah, the studio display, lots of the webcam shots, people looked really washed out. There was a very bad level of detail. The lighting didn't look quite right. So yeah, the webcam I think is the only thing, universally, this is not good. But hopefully, again, and thankfully, it seems to be something that can be solved with a software update rather than well, the hardware is broken or don't buy this because of this reason.
Yeah, and I would say I would say I would caution anyone who, if you've been considering a studio display and you're kind of on the fence, and maybe now you're sort of deciding to buy it, and you're like, oh well, the camera's going to be fixed with a software update. Definitely wait till that software update comes out and sees what it actually does, because cameras are tricky and software can do a lot with cameras. But this, Apple says that it's a software problem, but there's a potential chance that it could potentially be something hardware related and they just haven't caught it yet, or maybe they don't know. Software can only do so much with cameras. It can do a lot, but it can't fix a completely, either busted or not great camera. So if that's one thing,
what if it fixes the bug and the camera is still terrible, then where are you?
Exactly. So if that is a deciding factor for you, I would definitely hold off until you figure out what that software update or firmware update is going to look like, to see if it fixes a lot of problem. But it is pretty disappointing because as we mentioned in the iPad Air 5 segment, and I've talked about lots before, Apple's finally, especially with the pandemic and everything, and video calling becoming such more of an important role in our lives, and remote office work and stuff, they've really turned up their camera game. It wasn't that long ago that the MacBook Pro cameras were awful and everybody 720p, and everyone hated them. That was only a couple of years ago. It's not even been that long that they've been since they've been kind of ignoring that aspect. So it was weird. It was shocking when I saw the reviews and the early the early reactions come out and see something that seems so obviously, because when you look at pictures, you can go look at pictures that different reviewers our good old friend Renee Ritchie has a great breakdown of it all, and he tested he shows against it a bunch of different Apple devices, and it is a stark difference than what you would think. So if that's a sticking point for you, I definitely would say hold off. Definitely hold off.
It's hard because Apple did really, they didn't have to, right? If you're paying 15, you're buying a display for the display. I don't think anyone, if this didn't have a webcam, would be like, oh, I'm not going to buy that because it doesn't have a webcam. But Apple, chose to put a webcam in and really talk it up. And it has been probably the most disappointing aspect of the studio display so far, because everything else, despite what we said about the 120 hertz comments, even comments that were made about those reviews were saying, this is the best 5K display on the market still. The speakers apparently great. It has a very quite advanced kind of speaker surround sound. You wouldn't use it for music production necessarily per se, but for consuming content and stuff like that, it sounds really good. Likewise, the microphone is also apparently really good. So Apple didn't have to talk up the webcam, but it did, and seems to have not quite maybe delivered how it was hoping for. But yeah, as John Gruber sort of said, it has the right chip and it's got the hardware. So his understanding from, I assume, inside sources, that Apple can not only improve the quality to where we maybe expected it, but even sort of go beyond that to commensurate with the current iPad Air or the previous Pro. So yeah, don't write the webcam off just yet, but yeah, definitely a bit of a black mark on the copybook, as it were, in an otherwise pretty good kind of overall reaction to the studio and the studio display.
Yeah, totally. And there'll probably be more and more coming out, more reviews coming out, more reactions, more time with the devices. Same with me with the iPad Air and things like that. So like definitely keep an eye on iMore and check back and see how we're doing with all our new stuff. Quickly, I just wanted to mention before we kind of get into our fun little segment at the end of the show. There's a few interesting iPhone 14 rumors that I want to talk about. Coming from Min Chui Kuo, apparently Apple's iPhone 14 won't get a new chip. It'll stay on the A15 chip, but the Pro models, so the 14 Pro and presumably the 14 Pro Max, will get a new chip, the A16, if that's what it ends up being called. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. When I first saw it, I was like, that's ridiculous. And then I was like, went away and I was like, oh, maybe it's not ridiculous. And I think 9to5Mac have reported that they've heard similar. So yeah, you're right. The two base iPhone 14s will keep the A15 and the Pro models will get the A16. I suppose we've just kind of come to expect every year there's a new flagship iPhone and we get the AX series chip plus one from whatever the previous one was. I don't think Apple has ever not gone, certainly since maybe the iPhone 4 or 5 or whenever the A series chip was introduced. But I think it maybe makes sense because there's not been an iPhone in maybe the last 5 years where I've thought this doesn't have enough processing power. Yes, the processor enables better image quality processing and graphics performance and all that, but the chip is no longer a limiting factor. And if anything else, the chip is probably vastly ahead of some of the other aspects of the device that Apple could work to improve whilst not compromising on performance at all. It's also an easy way, because the lines are becoming more blurred, of distinguishing between the Pro and the not Pro iPhone. It's a great way to say, well, why should I buy the Pro iPhone? Well, it has a better camera and a faster chip, and it's a much, much easier way to differentiate between the two. But yeah, I think I wrote in my 2022 like iPhone preview about the new chip just a little bit, and it was like, the chip's no longer really of any concern. It just like you don't notice it. It's like a good referee in a football match. You don't notice that they're there, and I think it's the same with the chip. So I don't think we're gonna lose out on any performance. And like I said, if it also costs more to put those new chips in, to develop them, to make them. So if it means that the cost of the iPhone can stay the same, it won't be cheaper, but if it can stay the same, but we can get a vastly improved camera or display or new materials or new colors and stuff like that, then I think it's all right. But yeah, it was definitely a little bit of maybe a surprise when I first read it, for sure.
Yeah, it was surprising. And the comment that I remember seeing was, well, if Apple doesn't go to the next chip, then what's my motivation to upgrade from the iPhone 13 to the iPhone 14? To which my response would be, don't. I mean, you're not supposed to upgrade every year. There's really no reason to upgrade every year. I mean, I do it because I work for iMore and because I'm just weird that way. But I'm on the Pro anyway, so it doesn't matter to me. But yeah, I mean, iPhones are not intended to be given away and bought new every year.
Yeah, it's I think you're totally right.
Yeah, it's an interesting rumor, and I like you, Stephen, at first thought it was really like silly, and then I was like, wait, maybe that makes sense. But it does make me wonder, like, how does Apple justify like keeping, I mean, I guess it doesn't, I mean, first of all, it doesn't have to, because they don't really need to justify anything, to be honest. They want to make money, and that's what a company is meant for. But it makes me wonder, like you think if not much is changing about the iPhone 14, and theoretically we aren't expecting a ton, there might be a bit of a form factor change that maybe we're expecting.
This is another rumor we're dealing with this week, is that previously we had thought we were dealing with a substantial design change. John Prosser put out a leak in September last year by way of a render that said, hey, look, the iPhone 14 is going to be vastly different. Well, sorry, at least in his mind, the iPhone 14 Pro was going to be vastly different to the current model. It was going to have a flat back, so no camera bump. It was going to have, those round volume buttons from the iPhone 4, 4S, those kind of things.
Right.
And the hole punch camera on the front instead of a notch, again, for the Pro models. Mark Gurman, same month, said that the iPhone 4 was going to get a complete redesign. And we have since seen a bunch of CAD leaks and renders this week. Now, we don't know, of course, as with all of these things, whether this is, legitimate, accurate information, but they all seem to point to a iPhone 14 that looks very slightly different, if not identical, to the iPhone 13. So again, this kind of goes back to the point Karen raised. It's, if you take out the chip progression, you'd be like, oh, well, why would I buy the new iPhone 14? And it's like, well, maybe there'll be a redesign. It's like, okay, apparently there isn't going to be a redesign. So we're quickly running out of options as to what Apple can make better in the new phone that will make, especially the iPhone 14 as opposed to the Pro, that will make people want to upgrade. But I agree with Karen, like you said, Apple doesn't sell or create phones for super cycle, like every year upgrade, as it, people buy iPhones every day of the year, and most people are not on that September 12-month cycle. So.
I mean, don't get me wrong, Apple's checking account would love it if everybody would upgrade every year. But the reality is
not really the intention.
Yeah, the reality is that's not the intention, and you like most people definitely don't. But that's what I'm saying, Stephen. Like, since we're not really, we might. No one knows for sure, but if it's not going to be a significant redesign, Apple usually launches the new phones, keeps the old phone around, and usually knocks like $100 to $150 off it. If they do that with the iPhone 13 and the iPhone 14 has the same processor, all the same insides, doesn't have much of a redesign in any way, like, will the iPhone, like, I don't know. To me, it would be like, why not just buy the iPhone 13 and save yourself, the $150 if you're upgrading from something older or whatever. It would be interesting. It'd be an interesting move. And I'd wonder how they would try and differentiate it, or like, would they go as far as maybe would they completely get rid of the iPhone 13 lineup and keep around the 12 an extra year and just knock that down again a little bit?
Yeah.
Because like you think that there'd have to be some sort of logic to the two devices being two different prices, right? If so, I that's what I'm interested in. I'm kind of more interested. I'm almost less interested about like, oh, the iPhone 14 might have the same processor, because like Stephen mentioned, for years now, every time I've gotten a new iPhone, it's not like I've been like, oh, this is too slow for me. Like, that's never happened. And by the time I upgrade to a new phone, that phone is still well working and is fine and works just as well as the day I got it. So it's not really, the incremental processor upgrades every year aren't necessarily that big of a deal. So I'm kind of more interested what happens down the lineup of what this shift does for kind of what happens down the lineup. So that's what I think I'm kind of most looking forward to is what this is all going to do. Before we end the show, we decided to have a little bit of fun. And since we, in honor of the iPad Air 5 that I do have in front of me here, that we would just quickly take you through our iPad home screens, our very first kind of landing page, because why not? Some people, this kind of sparked because some people mentioned in the photos in my iPad Air review, they were like, you don't have a lot of apps, or you don't have a lot of things on your home screen. I was like, yeah, I like to keep my very basic home screen kind of sparse. So I'll explain it for the people who aren't watching, but I'll quickly show you all. This is what my main home screen looks like. It's basically just some basic widgets along the left-hand side, a Reddit widget up at the top for the subreddits I visit a lot, and then
is that the big one in the middle? Yeah,
and then a social folder that just has all my apps that I use for social, like Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. And then a media folder that has like the podcast app, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, Netflix, Disney Plus, and that's it. That's what my home screen looks like. And the reason I do that is mainly because I like wallpapers and I like making wallpapers kind of fit my home design. So if you see right now, I have a Wall-E wallpaper, and
That's very cool. Yeah.
Wall-E from Pixar is perfectly in the
You've activated your keyboard.
Oh, I did. Look at that. It's hard to see, but point being, I like if you have this big fancy screen, I like to be able to see it, and I like to be able to have pretty things on it. And I'm also somebody who changes my wallpaper a lot. Like I'll change my wallpaper almost like every week or second week, because like I just like to spice it up. So that's why I keep my home screen nice and kind of like open and less cluttered. I feel like it just like makes for a pleasant viewing experience in my opinion. So that's what I do.
I like the L shape you've got. So you've got the, some taller widgets up the left hand side, and you've got some thinner horizontal widgets like along the top, and then like a good bit of screen real estate and stuff.
Yeah,
it makes mine, I'll show you mine next, look really quite cluttered and terrible. I'm going to try and get that to focus in the blazing Scottish sunlight that I'm trying to deal with. So I have just a bunch of, I kept the top row of like cool, so I only use my iPad for content consumption. So if my iPad's on, it's because I'm watching a video, either live sports or Netflix or YouTube, and sometimes I'll pop it into like a HomePod or something to use for a podcast. So I kept like the Apple suggested line of widgets up at the top. So from left to right, I've got like the clock. I've got I know the word. It's calendar. I've got the calendar app, music, weather, some photos. I have a Sky Go widget, which is our cable TV sort of equivalent. I've got a bunch of folders. I have a giant music widget. Because I love the way the massive music widget puts up lots of different album suggestions and playlists and things like that. And then I have a podcast widget as well. But yeah, I'm definitely like, compared to yours, Luke, mine is full. So you can barely see the screen. I mean, I only have the stock wallpaper on it, but you can barely kind of see past the apps to what I have. But like I said, I spend very little time looking at my iPad home screen. I almost only use it for, I put it on, find a video and start watching. So yeah.
Well, Luke, you're going to hate mine. I have everything. I have everything that is on my iPad on the home page. So I have two gigantic widgets, the largest I could find for my calendar and my weather, like the weather with like, it's actually carrot weather.
Is that what the blue widget, the massive one? It's all weather.
Yeah, that's carrot.
Who needs that much meteorology in their life? That's
okay. Well, the weather here is very variable. We can go up and down 30, 40 degrees in a day. We can go from rain to clouds to snow to rain in a day. I need to know the stuff. I need to know what to wear. I need to know if I need what to pack. If I'm going to be gone all day, I may have to bring like 5 different umbrellas and boots or whatever. So I do. I need that information. I really do.
The calendar I can understand, but yeah, gosh, that is.
Yeah, I mean the calendar is just a calendar. And then I have like the apps I use the very most at the bottom. I have in the little bar at the bottom. I have Mail, Safari, Libby, which is the Overdrive app, so you can download books, and then my Kindle app. Because I read a lot. I read every day. I'm always reading a book, sometimes 2 at the same time. I do book clubs and the whole thing. I love to read. And then all the apps that I use for work, because I do social media for iMore. So I've got the Twitter, Instagram, Business Suite, which is the Facebook, like the app to control Facebook. And then I have photos, YouTube, messages, Slack, which is our work chat. And then I have 5 folders with all of my other apps right on my home screen. So
and that's the coolest thing about like ever since Apple kind of opened up its home screen to more customization other than just moving tiny little boxes around, is that you can really make it kind of like more tailored to your experience and what you use every day or what you want to see. And the one thing I forgot to mention about mine is I almost exclusively use iPads in like landscape orientation, just because I I don't know, because it's kind of like a little mini desktop then for me, I guess. And it just like, it looks nicer or whatever. So like my whole setup is very tailored to what that looks like. If you turn it into portrait mode, it's fine. It's still serviceable, but it doesn't quite look as nice. The wallpaper doesn't line up as nice. But I almost predominantly use mine.
It's funny. I never use mine in portrait mode, but it looks pretty good that way too.
Mine looks very chaotic. Again, exposure here is killing me, but that is just a nightmare. That is definitely meant to be a landscape orientation. Yeah, Luke, I'm with you.
But Stephen, you said that you pretty much, if you're using your iPad, you're using it to like watch something or listen to something or whatever. Like if I was only using my iPad for those purposes, I think I would want all of those. You know, I think I would want to set up more like yours, right?
Yeah.
Something where like it has everything, the most information for what I can watch right now, what I can listen to right now, and then I can just easily get to it. And then boom, it's full screen. I'm enjoying it.
Like a kind of a media hub. So I never sit down with my iPad to watch or so we have two iPads in the house. This is mine. I have the stinky first generation iPad Pro. My wife has the very nice new Pro, the 12-inch one.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason and it's always a second display that's just off to one side, to watch some sort of motor race or football, that sort of thing. So iPad is kind of always, kind of off to one side. So if I was someone who sat down with my iPad to read like Karen or to do foot wedding stuff like that, I would probably kind of tweak this a little bit, but this works for me.
Totally. If you want to show us your home screen, we'd love to see them. Go ahead and tweet us at iMore. Show us your iPad home screen. Tell us why you use the widgets you use, why you use the apps you use, and give us a shout. That's our show. That's this week. So many products to talk about. We didn't even really talk about the iPhone SE, but spoilers, next week we should be talking about the iPhone SE a lot, and we should be joined by a special guest who will have had some time with the iPhone SE. So if you have any iPhone SE questions in the meantime, definitely also tweet us, give us a shout, hit us up on Instagram, and let us know, and we'll do our best to answer those for you. But until next week, I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in, joining us live, asking questions, keeping the chat interesting and evolving. Thank you to all of our non-live listeners. If you're catching this after the fact, whether it's on YouTube or your podcast,
zombies.
All of our dead listeners. Is that what we call them now? But thank you for anyone who's listening or watching this after the fact. We appreciate you so much. It's why we do this. We love to interact with all of you. And thanks to Jim Metzendorf, our audio editor, who always makes us sound so great. But until next week, that's it for the iMore show. Have a good weekend.
Bye, everybody.